Right, in the last video, we connected to our remote MySQL instance via the command line. And while that is handy and all well and good, we oftentimes want to use a SQL client to interact with our SQL database. A really outstanding SQL client that is bespoke for MySQL is called MySQL Workbench. You should have installed it in a previous chapter. If not, go ahead and do that now and pick up this video in just a few minutes after you have it installed. So here I am in MySQL Workbench, and I'm going to create a connection to our remote MySQL instance. I'm just going to call this churn database. I will spell database correctly this time. I need my host name. So I'm going to copy that bad boy and paste it. The port is always 3306 on MySQL. As you can see, it already has root as our username. If you remember in a previous video in RDS, I changed the default master username from admin to root, and that's just MySQL convention to call your main account root. So this looks pretty good. We do want to use SSL. So there is an SSL file that I downloaded, and I put it in an SSL directory, and I'll show you where to get that in just a minute after we have the connection, and I'll also include a link to it actually in the book. So looks good here. Let's go back to parameters. We have our host name, port, username. We will be prompted for our password later. So let's test the connection, and yep, it wants our username, so I'm going to type in that username, or pardon me, it wants our password, so I'm going to type in the password, pardon me, and successfully made the connection to MySQL. All right. And it's going to open a SQL editor for us. And in this console, we can actually interact with MySQL, so we can issue queries, we can manage users, and here we can do a bunch of different things in MySQL Workbench, and we will be covering all of that in subsequent sections. But for now, that's how you get into MySQL Workbench, and you can bring up a little console like this, and then you can issue your commands. I do want to talk briefly about the account that we're using. We're using the root account, which is very, very powerful. It can do anything. And that means that you have the license to potentially shoot yourself in the foot. So it is best practice to, like we did with AWS, create more bespoke accounts. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our root account. Again, we're going to do this in subsequent sections, but we're going to use our root account to create a more specific account for a schema that we will use for our churn project. So that's going to be better practice. Again, the root user is very, very powerful, and we don't really want to use that in a production application. We want to reserve its powers for really the most important administrative tasks and creating users and the such. So we will go over that in subsequent sections. So I quickly wanted to point out where to get that SSL certificate. So RDS has SSL certificates that you can use. So I will put a link to this in the book itself, but you can just download the 2019 PIM file, and that will enable SSL on your connections via RDS. So definitely something that I would recommend using. And again, I will include a link to this in the book.